Okay, what is good, my peoples? If you've just joined us here on CSA Podcast, welcome, and we appreciate you coming through. And I hopefully, you're going to enjoy this next conversation. Which number is it now? I always lose track of.
Episode 9, believe it or not.
Episode 9.
Okay, I know,
look
crazy.
at this. Episode 9. Well, if you've just joined, if this is your first one, it's all good. You're more than welcome. I go by the name of Alex Mechanical, and we have Ivan Teese as also a co-host and our technology man. So, we have been speaking for a number of weeks now. I believe about 5 weeks, if I'm correct, around topics around the legacy of British identity, race, the legacy of racism, and just a lot of the ongoing difficult discussions around what identity means. And I think one of the things that's coming through quite clearly from the various conversations is that people's perception of identity is very different. People's perceptions of what they want is very different. Now, often a lot of these conversations tend to end quite badly because we're a place where we don't seem to be a society very good at giving people the time or the space to listen to each other and understand. We often want to feel like our opinion is correct, and if people don't hear us, we're no longer significant within this space. But it's about understanding that all of these different narratives definitely have a place in this space and just need a little bit of time to unpack and to be understood. So having said that, now my next guest, Terry Regan, is someone who I had met on lockdown, should I say, during lockdown. Oh no, tell a lie, before lockdown. I started engaging in a lot of community work in my area, something I had never really done before, apart from working in the school and in the youth club. And I wanted to find out a little bit about the regeneration programs that was happening. So I met Terry amongst many of the other locals who were involved in the various community courses and training sessions and meetings that we used to do. Myself and Terry really hit it off, and we found that a lot of our conversations were really going into depth about a lot of things, and we shared very similar views. And also, as someone who's been in the area for much longer than myself, I felt like I was learning a lot from his perspectives and his experiences, and sharing stories that I'd never really I could relate to initially. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to bring Terry on to help us unpack one of the particular issues that came up in our last interview with Luke Uncaged, and that's discussing the whole thing of the white flight in East London, and maybe begin to explore why we think this has happened. So at this point, I'd like you to put your hands together if you're at home, make some noise, whatever you want to do, for our next guest, Terry Regan.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. All the cheering around East London.
I can hear it.
I can just hear it now.
Pots and pans and everything.
Back for Terry. Everyone's on the balconies.
Oh, Terry. Okay, listen, Terry, thank you so much for coming through. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, so within the hour that we have, this is always difficult because me and you can talk about one topic for an hour.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to describe your upbringing. Where you from, what was that like, and just take us from the beginning, really.
Yeah, no, I come from Custom House area, along Freemasons Road.
Which is in East London, for those who don't know.
Yeah, East London. Yeah, sorry, East London. I had a great upbringing. I loved it around here. It was good community, the good people around here. And one of the good things was that the streets started at the same time. So we had loads of families move around the area within the same time with each other. So I probably had about 30 mates out on the street then, which is a shame there because children today, they're stuck in computers there. They don't really know anyone and they're moving around all the time. So it was great. Street parties, and we had a party when West Ham won the cup. Yes, West Ham have won the cup, for those of you who are thinking it.
Wow. All the 21-year-olds out there listening.
We had street parties. Just good community spirit, good friends, good neighbours. And it just seems safe. I felt safe. It really seemed safe in the area. You could go where you want. I know they say still there was things going on. There wasn't the social media in them days that highlighted the stuff. So it was just as bad, I suppose. But I never felt that. We always felt nice. People helped us up. Certain the ones I know now. And we was brought up the same, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. We was never rude to the neighbours. We was always polite. And we had, and he was the good, East End spirit, I suppose. It was really, and if I look back at things like it, I look back with fond memories, good memories. And obviously,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting you say East End because you often hear this when talking about East End. I mean, to the fact that they've made a family soap about the
yeah.
East End. How would you define East End to somebody who's probably wondering, okay, what was it about East London? Why there's such this East End pride?
I just feel we had we had great community, and the people who grew up in that way there. You just seemed to have it. It was like you could leave your doors open. You had your neighbours. You had people bringing in food and that. It's the first time I've never ever, for example, from the neighbours tasted Caribbean food or, jerk chicken and stuff like that. Never had things like that. You had good neighbours and you felt part of something. You felt that everyone was watching out for you. Everyone was looking out for you and caring. And
Sure.
you had the docks and stuff, as I say, the docks were thriving then when I was younger. They was closed down for a while then, but the docks was thinking now, and there was a lot of people who actually worked, like most of my dad's family and he's all them, they was all dog workers. So you see them all, everyone was round for Sunday dinner, everyone was round for tea on a Sunday, a big family get together, great parties, great nice times. The only thing that was against it is that everyone smoked in them days. So I was brought up with a room full of smokes. But
Right, okay, yes. That's true.
Every one of our old pictures have got a packet of Benson or a packet of Embassy or something like that.
I remember getting a lung full of the good stuff when I was younger and just thinking, yeah, that's normal. And then now thinking, God, I know we're all suffering for it now.
Everyone seemed about 6'2" with their big ass shoes and stuff.
Yes. It's funny because I think in those days it was really marketed as cool. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you could smoke on the back of the bus, and I think just old enough to maybe be aware when they stopped smoking on. So I remember on the underground trains, a lot of the underground signs actually had no smoking on the window. So clearly that meant that it was just at a point when smoking had just been banned on the underground. And I'm thinking, I can't imagine what that would have been like in a tunnel on a train, a carriage full of people smoking.
Oh, yeah. You think our times have changed? I'm too young to remember this, but I see the old videos. But look at the old videos, the Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. It was cool to have a fag in one hand and a drink in the other.
Yeah.
All them things there ain't so cool. They're dangerous.
Yeah. But especially if you're doing something physical, I mean, it's just a no-no for fitness. But yeah, somehow those two came. Well, it made money. That's really what it was.
Yes.
It was never a healthy thing. It was just it made money. And
when your doctor's recommending it, like you're not suddenly going to be like no, because that was the thing. The doctor would say to you, "Go on, have a fag, chill out, whatnot."
Chill and relax.
A bit of asbestos never hurt anyone. Go on, yeah.
Well, yeah, until we find out later on. I mean, okay, so having said all that, what did identity look like for you at that point? Like, is there in those formative years, are you able to recognize points in your growing up where you were starting to be like, okay, this is who I am, or this is what I've been taught to see myself, anything like that?
You see yourself, I think you see yourself in them days. You see yourself as like when it's like, pie mash was a regular thing. You had certain issues and things you had, family ties were very strong. You had your cousins all around the corner in them days. Now it's much more spread out and people live in different places. There was family within a walking distance, My nan's and my grands lived just around the corner to me. So you felt part of, the West Ham sort of thing. You felt part of that. You felt, I don't know, I can't explain. It's just a feeling of belonging. It's a feeling of belonging to something. And you growing up in that sort of thing. We played for the same, we had mates, we had street football teams, we played for the same local football team. We didn't, when things were going on, events in community, you used to go over there, you found out through your mates, they're doing this over there, doing that over there. They're offering safety now is, I understand why they've got to have it, but it's gone a bit mad, we used to just go over the park and went swimming over the Lido. And, I've got nothing but great memories of when I was a kid with things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, and as I say, it's changed over the years. I think one of the... Go on, tell. I think one of the reasons it's changed and all is because people, don't stay long-term in housing there, don't they? So many people on temporary tenants there, they're in the houses for... a couple of years. It's like a few doors away from me. The neighbour that was there before who passed away was there for 30 years. Since she left that 30 years, someone bought it. You've had about 10 people in there in 7 years.
Yeah.
And so the fact of the thingy, the community that it was years ago, is faded away because you haven't got the long-term longevity of people investing in an area because they're moving to different places. They're always on the go. They're always, for not blaming them for that because it's their fault, and it's not just their fault. They've had to move and they've had to think. They've had a lot of trouble, and that's what's happened. There's no there's no longevity to it. So to build the communities, when we first come round, all them families, I think there's about 28 to 30 houses around here on a close. They all moved in the same time, all new builds, and I grew up with their children. I grew up seeing them. You grew up being nice and polite. You had the moral identities put into you, the moral code put into you. We had our dinner at the table. We ate as a family. We ate as we had to eat. My dad was no way was a tyrant, but you had respect and you sat and ate your dinner nicely and politely.
Okay, so what you're talking about, what I'm hearing from you is there was a sense of structure into how people did things, and maybe that in that way, that sense of structure and that sense of routine is one way of beginning to form an identity. I have an interesting question for you because I know one of the things my former guest Luke Uncaged talked about is in an area like Newham. So he spoke about Newham, and Newham is where Custom House is in. Yeah. It's part of East London. It's part of the docks. He talked about the fact that there was a shift that happened, and now there's a lot of immigrants, and that's had an impact on the existing English, predominantly white working class community. From your perspective, we had the docks happening for many years. As you said, it was thriving. I'm guessing that would mean that there would also have been lots of dockers and workers that came in from other countries because of their work. So how did that look like then? Was there an integration then, or was it similar to what it is now? Or
no, it started to be. There's many about in them days of immigrants of different nationalities and things like that started to come. I think the dock shut down like 78 to 81. I think the last, and there was, I remember if I looked at it, there's over 10,000 people all of a sudden at the same time from East London become unemployed. That's a lot to change a shift of something, not just that. Yeah. So then, I suppose then as they grew up, things like that, you had more people moving in, like doing the things like from the Asians, doing the markets and stuff and things like that. So I see, similar to what he was saying in that way. But what also was that people come to think, I suppose, because they blame them and all, you know what I mean? I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying they did. Then people start to think the streets ain't safe, they're this, it ain't safe in London, let's move out. Then there was the thing in the 80s when Margaret Thatcher gave the right to buy. So once you got the right to buy, a lot of people who probably may never in their lifetime dream that they could own their own house are buying houses. And then they found once they bought an house in London, you could go and get more value for money by moving out a little way. You could get more things and all that. So there's all that. So it's also both faults. It's both of the things that you turn the rights from it. Do you know what I mean? The jobs, I think the doc said. I mean, I don't think people quite realise that. And when they did finish the docks, they wasn't just built on straight away. They was left derelict for ages. And when they did start building on the docks and they did start earning money, it was big companies and big landowners who made the money. It wasn't shared by the local people. The local people were left there was. They never had no help from that, never had nothing from that. So your identity become a little bit less of what it was. Because then the working class, like from the thing become a little bit less of what it was. Because they had to rebuild their own identity. As I said to you, when my dad and work with the docks there, all the families, whole families come out of work.
Okay, so I want you to hold this thought because I'd like to revisit this with you and I'd like to unpack this. What you've just said here is in talking about identity, you've aligned it with the idea of not only routine and family structure, but you've talked about the fact that working, it seems like from what you're saying that maybe a lot of people individually and even as a family built identity even around their professions. And for a lot of those people, professions might have been docks. Okay. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. I want to kind of draw back into your personal story before we move on, because again, you've got a super interesting story. My understanding was that you worked in the construction site industry, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about this and kind of how did that journey progress from there?
Well, you start in that when you're younger. You do the things. Mine was like demolition. Then to my mid-20s, I had a bad accident, and I think to myself, that's when I had a thing in 20. I had 27 breaks. I had a bad fall and that through the roof of the demolition, and then that's when, as you're recovering from that, that's when you first start
I'm
realizing.
surprised Jackie Chan didn't reach out to you, by the way, bro, because
No,
you would have
That's a
really
world record right there.
Yeah,
I like the way you glossed over that as well. Yeah, 27 breaks. It's like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, as you do.
And then you start realizing as your mental health and your different things happen as you go through life and stuff. I suppose it stems back to what you do now. And I think when you have the traumas in life, it isn't just the traumas. There's also traumas you don't realize. It's like, as I say, I think before my dad passed away when I was 16, and for a few years, I think I was very angry about this. Do you know what I mean? So the trauma was that, which you don't realize that at the time. So I had certain events that happened in my life, and then when you go on like it, as you start to get a bit older, you know, it ain't people's fault. You try to talk to someone, but there wasn't as much knowledge around it as what there is now. Right. So you start to hit the side of depression. You start to think as you getting different. You start to realize and reach out to try to help other people, because you realize how much it affected me, which I didn't. Sorry, I realized now how much it affected me, but I didn't realize how much it affected me at the time.
Okay, so at the time, if you were able to go back into those shoes for a second, what did processing look like for you at that point? So you've mentioned two interesting points. You talked about the fact that you had this major accident and you was then, I guess, not working. You mentioned the passing of your dad when you were young and the fact that maybe how you processed it, or maybe you didn't realize you wasn't processing it. What sorts of thoughts at that time were happening? Was you attempting to talk to people, or was it just not not the thing that you did at that time? So it didn't even enter your mind?
It's not the thing you did at that time. It was the culture of them days, I suppose, because of that. When you say about the culture that was good from the old East End and the Cockney times, also thing is the man up thing, which is no good to say to anyone to say, man up, you'll be able to sort it. And so you convince yourself you're okay. You think you're okay. You don't realise, you don't think deep, because everyone says to you then, you know what I mean? It's a bit like the testosterone and the masculinity. I'll be all right. I'll sort this out. I'll be all right. I'll sort this out. But you don't. And it just, all you do is put it away. And you've got to revisit it. And you've got to revisit it sometimes. So when you revisit it all the time, that's why I say to people, one of the main things I say to people there when you do things like the stuff there is talk about it, get help, understand. I think and the fact that people wouldn't listen, it was difficult, I suppose, for them to understand things in them days and all. It was also difficult for me to talk, because I suppose it's I'm terrible now, and I'm never thinking it, but I think it was the admission that you were weak, or that you had to go somewhere where you didn't want to go. So I didn't really think about it ages later. But now I realise if I could go back and talk to myself, as you said, I'd probably slap myself around the face and say, shape up, boy, and start talking. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, you could have been that person that you needed at the time, right? The
Yeah.
person that other people needed, because it's wearing it on your sleeve, isn't it? Because we've all, do you know, when it's like when you think about back in the day when your families were together, you're all together having a laugh. Yeah. But it's not till you get older that you start looking around the room and you're like, yeah, he's got that issue and they've got that issue, but no one talks to each other about it. Everyone's suffering their own little individual things, you know, oh, he's drinking too much, she's doing that. And all of a sudden, you know, if you could just have those conversations where everyone just understands, like, you know, you've got an issue, and they help them wear it on their sleeve a little bit. But again, it's just it's a different time. But it's really humbling to hear you say that you just so openly say that as well. Because I bet there's some people still from then till now probably still sitting on a lot of stuff that they couldn't potentially say outside, so to other people. So it's quite powerful.
Yeah, 100%.
You got to be able to do it. If I could go visit with things like that, I can look back there and think, oh, they had that. Oh, I can see that now. Oh, wow. Do you know what I mean? And then but your time, I suppose it's building a wall around you, and you just think, okay, and it'll come down. But you need to talk about things. And I feel like, you know, I had a bad time with certain things. I had a lot of problems, a lot of issues and stuff. And it's made me think that I can do what I do now, because I can bring it from my own experience. It's good to learn things from a book, but I'm not just reading it from a book. I'm reading it from the perspective that I know how people feel and talk and how I felt. And You know, so
So you're
you.
constantly tapping back into you're constantly tapping back into this space of self-reflection. I think one thing that stood out for me about you is this ability to self-reflect, and I think especially as an older person, someone that's older than myself, it was very inspirational to see that, because I think a lot of people would tend to feel that being an introspective male and reflective and being able to own up to weaknesses and everything, and being able to redefine the idea of what masculinity is and what it looks like, is something that will be viewed as more recent, as progressive. And so whenever it's someone from an older generation who has seen both ends of the spectrum and lived both ends of the spectrum, I think sometimes we don't appreciate how much of an effort it will take,
especially because it's so easy to be stuck in your ways, right? You know, when you feel like you're just too far gone, or sometimes, you know,
which is people make that excuse, don't they? I'm too old or too long in the tooth to change now. Yeah, thank you, Alex. But I just feel that to me, I'm not worried about being ashamed or talking about anything like it. I think it's important that you get that out there. And as I say, I just realised now that deep conversation is the route to solve lots of people without going in with a hidden agenda or thinking that as soon as someone says something you don't like, you emphasise on what they've said they don't like, is to letting them come around and having their views and then sorting it out through the conversation. I don't want to be right. I want to be heard. It's more important to keep someone's friendship than to be right. But I just want to be heard, and it's just sometimes if you need to be heard. I suppose years ago, my own self and all, I was obsessed with being right. I was obsessed with being this. I know what I'm talking about.
I think we're all guilty of this.
Yeah, we're all guilty of this. I think one.
Yeah, if you're guilty of it, guys, drop a like on the video. If you're guilty of it, that's everyone.
Okay, so I want to move this ahead now. Because now this has now inspired you to do a lot of work inspiring other men. I know you've got this project, Talk to Terry. Why? Because I've been part of this this project that you started up, particularly during lockdown. But could you talk a little bit about it? What's motivated you, and what do you hope to get out from that? What is the overall message that you think the Talk to Terry project is promoting?
Well, I think self-awareness. I think a lot of people, when they do it, they start groups off and they carry on with a group for a little while. They do a few things. They do a 5-week course, and then they lose touch with everyone like that. I wanted to get it by. I want to build camaraderie, friendship, so people are there for each other. They can be involved with each other to build it, to meeting. So I know there's a few people from the group who met each other, done certain things. You get a few things together sometimes. I've done a lot of courses. I've done the level 1 mental health, level 2 and 3 mental health. I've done the suicide prevention. I've done self-awareness courses and things. And to me, talking, to get people to talk, to not be how I was, is probably the inspiration of it. And then I see certain people who come in and they're giving it all, this and that. And you think a lot of times they've got a lot of problems themselves. And when people do that, do things like or behaving that way, I just like to know that people to know that someone is there for them, or there is people there for them. And I care about it. I don't just want to turn my back on someone. I don't just want to think. We all made mistakes. We all done things wrong. You're not defined by what you've done. You're defined by who you become. And if you learn and grow in life, growth, one of the biggest words to me of all my life in what I've done over the last few years is growth. The word growth is absolutely massive to me, because people can grow. If you open your mind, you don't get closed mind, you listen to people's opinions. I know people's opinions change to get someone who's got their hard line views on certain things. But if you have a conversation, a deep conversation with somebody, if you listen, let someone know you're there. Let someone know you care. Let someone know you're listening. Ask them if they're okay. Don't just say you're okay. Are you okay? You know with yourself, if I nerve you for a while's sake, what do I always do? I always will make sure.
Yeah, just check in that people are okay.
Yeah, it's just a check-in. And when say to someone, like just a simple good morning sometimes. It might not mean the one word, but it means so much to people.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting that you say this. I mean, Ivan, I don't know what you're thinking, but like me and you, when talking about the kind of conversations that we've had, and again, look how we wanted to, what we wanted to come out of this community service and announcement project. One of the two things that we've often talked about is listening and communication. And it's really interesting that even in from a perspective of this mental health and understanding of self and understanding of each other's, it's the same two attributes there, listening and communication. I think that's quite powerful.
Very interchangeable.
Yeah. And it actually is what you need, because you can't go in with a closed mind of thinking I'm right, and you can't win. You can't help anyone by thinking I know what I'm talking about. You need people to help yourself.
Sorry, Terry, I disagree. No, I'm joking.
So you're doing talk to Terry. You've brought all these people together, and you're encouraging men to begin to talk and open up, as you said, meant camaraderie and positive communication, listening to each other. If I'm going to ask you from a wider context now, tying back to what you talked about with the community and growing up, you said something very interesting. You talked about the fact that because a lot of the roads were newly built and some of the estates and the housing projects were built at the same time, a lot of families were kind of, the kids were of the same age. Yeah. And, maybe the parents, the couples were of the same age in terms of how long they've been together. So if I'd like you to define for me, why is community important? You've talked a lot about community and why that made you feel good. Why is it an important thing, would you say?
Because I feel, one of the things I feel, because a lot of times that people have been through these hardships with the East End and the trouble they've been through, one of the reasons I got in with the regeneration, because I don't want people pushed about. I don't want people to be moved. I hear people being moved about to different places up north because they've been, they've got to get out and all things. That's one of the reasons I got involved in it. If you have been around these places all these years, you should have a share of what's going on. And they don't listen to the people enough. They make an observation of what people need. We're going to build this for you. We're going to build this for you. We're going to build that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. And if it's done in a good intentions, that it's done, it's good. But a lot of things, it's like look over the last so many years. Do you know what I mean? All the pubs have gone. And if pubs that are stayed open, pubs have become wine bars. Cafes have become bistros.
But then why would you say pubs are very important? The only reason why I'm saying this is because I also think that there's probably, depending on what generation you are, people would probably have a very different relationship to what pubs are. So maybe could you describe what the significance of what the pubs had at that time and how that's impacted you?
It was a connection to your friends and to the community. You found out a lot of news in the pubs. You found out a lot of things that were going on in the pubs. When people say pubs now, people always get the expression, you've got to go in there and come out hammered. No, you had a lot of couples used to go in there. A lot of friends and mates, mum and dads, would pop in for a couple and then have a little nice thingy or a cafe on a Sunday. Remember, they closed on them days. No, they closed earlier. They closed on a Sunday. So if you get like that now, you find that people also become one of the things that has lost community. I think people have been priced out of London also. That's what I was saying to you there. When you get there'd be bistros and they become different names, they say. And you've got, look at round here, the difference between going across the bridge. It's unbelievable. You know what I mean? It's
when you say going across the bridge, well, that is for our non-listeners, that is.
Sorry, for the custom house. You've got this side of regeneration, the other side, you've got the XL. The XL is
separated by the train line.
Separated by a light. And that's what we used to say.
Yeah.
And that's what I said in my thing that I've done. How does a bridge become a barrier? A bridge has become a barrier. A bridge shouldn't be a barrier. And when you go in there, you've got all the money over there. You've got things. It's happening around a few places in London. You get like the North Village area. You get like, and you've got like the Royal Wharf buildings. Or you get things like that. And I think that people now, especially with Elizabeth line coming, there's going to be people want to move to it because it's 3 minutes to to Canary Wharf. Yeah, I think it's about 7 or 11 minutes. I can't remember there.
It's literally it's one stop. It's about 3 minutes on the train from one stop. But just want to give a bit of context for those listening. What Terry's talking about is there's a Docklands Light Railway transit system that runs mostly. Well, it does do east to west and south to north, depending on what route it is you're traveling. But this particular line runs through Newham. In the east and west direction, and on one side of that railway, it's literally poor, working class, quite neglected part of Newham. But on the other side, immediately, it's huge projects ranging from the Excel Conference Centre to now the City Hall building where the Mayor of London is now based, and lots of just ever constantly developing projects that are happening there. I know there's plans for a business retail park on the other side of the railway. But all of that is happening clearly on one side. And when you stand on that bridge that Terry's referring to, it's just very clear.
It's very stark, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like just... a good example is Custom House, or as you leave the station, as you walk down the pearly white stairs, you suddenly go then out to Freemasons, and it slowly gets worse and worse the further you get up the road. And and then there's more deaths and crime, etc., etc. So it's very it's very stark. If that doesn't paint a picture, I don't know what will.
It definitely it definitely does. And as I say, you've got like the you've got the plus restaurants over there, you've got the plus things. So you look another thing with East End and stuff like moving on, when it's become, you feel like Custom House. I think I spoke to you about this before. Custom House seems like it's come to a bit of a standstill. It's gone stagnant. They're doing a lot there to try to improve it and try to get regeneration up in the area. But it's been in the progress for 20 years. I'm not blaming the ones today because it's not their fault. It's just how things have gone. And but in the 20 years of promises, and we're going to do this, you're going to do that. Why you're saying there, you've seen the other side that was an empty place, remember, which was abandoned, as all of a sudden become £500,000 to £1 million properties. Pubs, when you walk in, or restaurants, you walk in the door, it charges you 30 quid just to walk in the door.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying about priced out. There's no little cafes no more. They're turned into these little things. No little pubs to go and have a thingy. Then they've got a drink in them. But the wine bars, the things have become bistros now, and there's all these posh names now. This wasn't the East End. This wasn't the East End I know.
Sure. Okay. So what you're now talking about is an identity shift. And I think let's talk about it a bit more, because even when we invited like Luke Uncaged to talk about this, much of what he said, it's not the first time I've heard him say this, and I definitely felt, and I noticed from talking to people from the late 90s, but especially the early 2000s, there was a growing feeling of this changing of identity. Now, it's a very difficult conversation because, like, we're talking about identity, but if tackled, no, I'm not even going to say that. It can often slide into controversy around racism and other things. So I guess I would like us to try to unpack why we think that is, because I think what you've mentioned so far is some very clear, understandable reasonings as to what changes look like and why that might make people feel unsettled. Why do you think it's often borderline with racism at points?
I think a lot of times when I see it like that, I think back, it was obviously we said change, but it was fear of change. Someone was coming in doing what they wanted, taking to their views, not mine, is taking their jobs, trying to make their life difficult. But a lot of people didn't stay around here, so they felt unsafe, and that's why a lot of people. So if you look at the times with the old East End now, you're probably going to get more East Enders in Basildon, them sort of places, aren't you? You know what I mean? People from all church, from go down, a lot of my friends have moved into that area. So I think it was that the racism thing, it became, because as I say, they come from the docks. When you're a dock area, you are going to get different cultures and communities probably in your area first, because it's one of the things that the docks bring, why the people coming across on boats and things like that with that area. And I think they put a fear into people of change. It made them not want to do it. This is, I know this is a funny thing to say now. This is a really funny thing to say. I don't think you realise it. Obviously, my mum would be 90 now, but my mum went to the doctors. It's the first time my mum ever see a black doctor.
Yeah.
And so my mum wasn't. They wasn't racist. They weren't worried about it. But it took my mum aback. Times are changing. Times are changing. So when you say, things like that, it is the identity. When you've got your identity, you feel you're losing your identity, as I say, with the docks closing down, with people out of work, and there you're walking down a place that you knew Pete on the end, Joe down there, so Simon down there. Now Joe's moved out somewhere. Then you've got this new person moved in who's from, I don't know, from Somalia or somewhere, and you start thinking, oh, what's going on here? And then you used to pull up when you come into Upton Park. I think that's what Luke was saying the other week. I'm saying it from a different perspective. But if you was a away supporter and you come to see West Ham play, who was predominantly known as the Cockney, well, still is the Cockney team, you get off at Upton Park, you know what it was like at Upton Park. So it's got to be quite a big shock. You're going to think that the Cockneys basically, from India or something, from things. It's not the fact. I ain't saying it from the racist point of view. I'm just saying through people I've heard speak and all that, and that it was a big change of lifestyle.
So do you think then, I mean, we're going to unpack this, we're going to go a bit deeper with that, but do you think that there may have been, so do you think it's also about timing? At a time when, say, the docks had then been shut down, there was also a time when immigrants were moving in and those things were happening at the same time. So would it be fair to say that maybe foreign faces, foreign accents, foreign languages was almost, because it happened at the same time as government initiatives of closing down, a whole industry, which put people out of work. That almost became the most easiest point to blame because it was the most tangible and it was the most visible thing to see.
It's also, it's also false things, loose lips. People, you know what it's like when someone starts a rumor, it's because of this, it goes round. When something like it, a small story becomes a fact.
I was actually wrote it here on my paper here. I was like, because I was going to ask you, was it like the earliest fake news? Is it the equivalent in some ways? It's almost like the government's not done a good enough job to kind of explain what's actually happening. Like, here England or East London, we're going to move X percentage into, these are the benefits that you're going to see as a result of it. These are some of the changes you might see. And then, like you were saying, rumors start turning up that, like, hey, did you see that family that moved in down the end of the street? They're a bit different, X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden, it's like you see the growth of that happening more so and more and more. And then all of a sudden, you think it's going to be like it's never going to stop, sort of thing. Is it almost like fake news to some?
It is, I think so. It's a fake news. It's a story becomes a fact, and it goes around, doesn't it? So where was so many? What I'm saying is, to that happening and to the thingy, I'm not saying it wasn't part of it, but there were so many other facts towards that. You could say, as I said earlier, over 10,000 people in the Eastern Dockland areas were out of work at the same time. Then you've got the other side of that happening. They had the same thing. And the thing is, in all now, when you get the same thing happening with them, and they was coming across, some of them couldn't find work. Because we said it before, two truths can exist.
When you say them, you talk about the immigrants. Immigrants you're saying also couldn't find work.
They couldn't find work at all. But two truths can exist in the same place. But for some reason, with our government and people, it had to be either or either. It could have been both, and it was both. The two truths can exist in the same place because they were coming in short. Obviously, you're doing that. When I said to you earlier, families thinking, and then you get more crime. And just because of that, you also get more crime because 10,000 people have come out of work and they're going to try to earn some money. So you get them ducking and diving to earn themselves a bit of money. The thingy of self-survival, self-care.
Yeah, they're not getting furloughed all of a sudden, are they? They're having to make do.
Yeah, and you go. Survival mode. It's a survival mode
for sure.
Yeah, sure. No, I was going to say it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think it's something that I've often said. I even said it in the group when I first met you. But me and my sister have spoken about this because growing up in the 80s in Newham, in Custom House, I as a young person felt very different to most people. You sensed the racism. I sensed it as a kid growing up. And it's interesting because in some ways, although, it could be argued crime has gotten worse.
Yeah.
Particular types of crimes that we're seeing in areas like Custom House and others has gotten worse. So, for example, the way that we see casual killings, although I do think murders amongst young people has gone down, I believe, statistically. But casual killings was something that you didn't necessarily see in that way as you was a kid. However, crime was very rife, I would say, growing up in the 80s.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I would say as a black kid, I didn't always feel 100% safe.
Yes.
So I guess one of the things that I'd like to look at and explore with you a little bit is to find your perspective on this aspect. And the reason why I say this is because at a certain point, one of the things that's been identified is a lot of people from the Cockney community, from the white working class English community had left and flighted from East London because they felt there was a surge of immigrants coming in. But what I would say is that wasn't always the case, that there was a surge of immigrants, yet foreigners were often experiencing some sort of resistance or some sort of challenge.
Yeah.
From your perspective, is that something you was aware of, or you knew that was an issue going there at the time?
Yeah, I'd say I was aware of it. Yeah, but I'd say, but it's what I'm saying to you is I was aware of it, but to me, it was the most main denominator of what they said. But there was also other contributing factors to that. But sometimes they become lost. As I said to you before, there was the crime was going to go. There was the explosion of crime. There will always be things like that with money and stuff like it. But there was crime for survival. When you say about it wasn't Kingston, it was the same lot. It kept to the same crew. You hear the old stories about what they say about the Crays or stuff like that. They kept to their own people. It wasn't about ordinary people. It was about that sort of thing. I suppose what's happened there with the knife crime has become different in them ways. I suppose they say people have a fight in them days or things like that, but it's still people. There were still killings. There were still things going on.
Yeah, of course,
you just, as I said, it becomes the narrative that if you are struggling to survive, you will sometimes have the flight for survival and try to do the best you can to get by. That becomes, most people do that, self-survival. A lot of people don't admit they do that, but you will always try to have something like that. It's just how far you will go is the question of what it is now. With respect, when you look past on things like that, when you look about it, the working class from the Cockney, whichever reason, which many reasons, lost their identity. And they lost their identity in that way because there isn't as many as there is. There's still some about, of course there is, but like to how it was in them days. And they're looking after what I'm saying, leave your street door open, they're looking after each other, they're caring for each other. So there was many layers to it. But unfortunately, what's something that I was saying, when something goes bad, you get government or local politicians exploiting the main reason that makes a better view of stuff for them.
Makes better news for them.
Makes better news for them. So if you say that now, if you said to me, if Regan's in it, it always comes off like that you lost your identity because you lost your job, you lost your area, you lost your job, then you're losing your area, then you're losing your family, then you're losing that self-worth of preservation that you had, the family ties. I mean, I don't know, there probably is still families that go for eat together and all that there, but we had to eat together. We had to share the table together. And it was vitally important. Everyone had to come around Sunday. Even when I'm the youngest of six, so even my brothers and sisters, when they got older, they got married, they still had to come around Sunday evening. They never had no choice in this. They was told they got to come around Sunday evening. You got to share in the we didn't contrary to people's beliefs though, we didn't always have pie mash on stage, you'd have a cock your knees up. So
we've got a comment that came in. I'm loving the name, by the way. Testing. The East End has changed. There is a hole everywhere and mosques, pubs closing down. It's so different to how we grew up.
Yeah.
Just on that note, very quickly, from your point, Terry, why are pubs closing? Like, if we're saying that, and just to, like, for my thoughts, if it's a financial reason, and for example, you think of like the Cockney community wanting to band together to keep things going, like as a last ditch effort for the Cockney community, etc. Like, why isn't that like the last kind of pitchfork moment
initiative
of listen, we've got one symbol. And mosque is a really good example because, Muslims, etc., these different religious groups, they band together to create these places. And crazy enough, you see pubs turning into mosques, which is quite mad.
Yeah.
So what is it? Why were pubs left to die, if that makes sense? Why? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, there's a few things to it. I could say one of the things I think, as you said, it is simply that it become that the pub, the supermarkets, you go and buy things of bottles of beer that last, next to nothing, and then you didn't go into them. I think, I'm not joking if I say this and all right, around Custom House and Canning Town, there's probably over 40 pubs that have closed over the last so many years. Mm-hmm. When I was younger and I did drink, I didn't even have to cross the New Amway, the motorway, the A13.
A13.
I didn't have to cross the A13 if I was going to the pubs. There's nearest one to me is probably about 15-minute walk. The one across the thing's been shut for years. I think it is that. I think it's the bastion and all. Like when they say that the last bastion of society with things like, I get what you mean, but I think that it become with people and when the life changed, everything changed. People are more interested in moving out to a safer place and a safer area, which is why they went to these areas where there's more greenery, there's more fresh air, for the want of your word, or to seaside areas. So because of all the things that caused it in the first place, you had the domino effect that made that domino effect. It's like, of course, like, you know, it's nothing to do with being racist or something. Like, was it Tess said about it? It's like when they shut and they put a mosque in a place that you come as your identity that was your own when you was younger, and what you had some great memories there. All of a sudden it's a mosque. Someone who ain't, I think to someone who ain't racist, I think in the past that's annoyed them a little bit, because people.
Well, yeah, it's the physical. It's a physical manifestation of change. Now it's the final point of showing you it's gone. You know what I mean? Totally. So I mean, but I think Ivan, you asked an interesting question there, because one of the themes that I'm seeing as well as a British-born but coming from a Caribbean community and family is that it felt like within the working class community, it's either people haven't fought to come together to make something happen, maybe people's morals are just low, or maybe people just expect that it has to be put right because they're English. I mean, which one do you think it is for you? Because one of the things that I do see myself is there is a declining of not only presence of the white working class in places like East London, but really all over London, but also there don't seem to be any sense of fight or strategy or coming together. How do you think working class people address that?
I just think that, as I said before, people like in them days, you should have got together and something to form things you do today and try to put their point across. There's no politicians represent them now. Really, there's no one in as far as I'm concerned, there's no one in politics who represents these areas. They represent them areas, but do they do it properly? It's like you've got someone who's been brought up with a silver spoon in Chelsea. What does he know about what you've got the problems around this area? He ain't got a clue. He's never known about the things he's never known what it's like to sign on, worry where your next bit of money's coming from, worry about how your children are going to be fed. So if they'd have got together years ago, they had a bit more support from the politics things, or a bit more support with the area, or a bit more support in putting things together. It's like them over the regeneration, over the places they've done over there we were talking about earlier. We had the London Olympic legacy. Did they do what they said on the tin? Yeah, there's still places poor. In fact, look at it. Yeah, there's more. We were saying this. There's more use of food banks today. There's more use. There's more people, unemployed. There's more things. They didn't put any emphasis or in money in protecting or trying to make the people that live there already, make them advance for their cause. So therefore, you had no one helping you, so you lost interest. So you seek solace or happiness elsewhere, which become moving just outside London, a cheaper place, a cheaper area, greenery, a nice place like that. And then and if you are in that way inclined that you did feel you was racist or something like that, or people who are racist, then you got that also the taking away
on top of that.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing I've noticed, like within the Muslim community, for example, I would say one of the things, and it's not just about being a Muslim. I think you probably find that within different communities, like you've got the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani, Indian community. You could be places in the Arab world, for example. But one thing that I do seem to see as an outsider is that there seems to be a strategy, a planning of organization, knowledge about business, knowledge about making money, knowledge about keeping money within the community, as well as a strong identity within family.
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Do you feel people in the working class Cockney community, or maybe the wider working class English community, have what it takes to organize themselves in similar ways, which allows them to move with power? Because essentially, I would also say, although some people say that in the government are not looking after their own kind, or they're not looking after the people that was there in the first place, essentially the government were not necessarily, I would say, not necessarily looking after Muslims either. It's just that Muslims were able to take action. Do you feel that people within the white working class have that ability to do that?
I think, I don't know about today, I think the people are getting it back. I think when the lockdown and the actual thing there, it has brought communities quite together again in that way, but from both sides of that. But I do think years ago that from the East End, the Cockney things, that there was so many things then they could have done with it, but they had a sort of thing like that in them days. But the thing is, they were called unions. And the unions used to drive out to people. It's like my dad, I don't vote Conservative, but I remember when I was a kid, we had all Labour things in the winter. If my dad thought I thought I voted Conservative, he'd come out, he'd spin in his grave and come slap me. Do you know what I mean? so I think to myself now. So when they had unions, but over the years, the unions, I mean, they started strikes again, funny enough, but unions in them days were quite powerful. And they actually was a part of getting people voted. So once they lost that, and once as I scan back to, I'm repeating this, but once the docks shut down and everything, and the unions had nothing to represent in that way, then you find the people that was there that could have got people together disappeared themselves also.
Right. Okay.
So it's like when you do this community around here, you've got a few people you can trust, who you really rely on, who can get things done. There's a few people that are nice and will try to help, but they ain't as thingy about getting stuff done as you think. And the same as when we go back to that, with your Cockney identity was great. But there's another thing that comes onto the other side, what we haven't said earlier. We were talking about mental health. If I'd have gone in no offence, is not blaming anyone. But if I'd gone into the pub years ago and I said to my mates, I feel really down today, go, what's the matter with you? Have a pint.
Yeah.
Don't be stupid.
Yeah.
No one would have went to me, come here, tell mate, let's have a talk. And I'm not blaming them for that, because I probably would have done the same thing myself.
Yeah.
But, so there's also, sometimes when people say about these identities, having this really strict identity, there's also the downside to it and all, when you look at things like it. And I think if I could go back then, I'm not saying I could solve it. If I could go back then, you got sometimes people you find get together because they got a common goal or a common agenda, which some of the times the common agenda is racism, which some of the time, do you know what I mean? So if you've got the common agenda, like, when you've had guests before and the other was speaking about it, they think that by sorting the racism out, if that's what they believe, it's going to solve all the other problems. It's not. It's about why you ended up with this trouble, why you ended up with this poverty, why this trouble. There's about 30 problems that led to it.
And I think you mentioned a very strong point there, and I'd like to touch on that real quickly, because you mentioned about the fact that men not talking about things and suppressing things. And I'm wondering if that has impacted maybe the situation now, because in order to get into these sorts of conversations about where we at and what do we need to do, it enters some very difficult territory. Now, what's really interesting about you, Terry, as a male, as an older male, as a Cockney male, as an English male, you're someone that's very reflective. You're someone that's very much willing to look at something and understand where I was at and where I need to move forward. And I think that has allowed you to move forward in ways like, you've talked about setting up the Talk to Terry project, and you're doing more. Do you feel like there's a connection between communities not thriving, communities feeling frustrated, but also the culture of people not being able to speak about themselves from an emotional perspective? Do you think there's a strong link there?
100%, definitely. You feel like you put that thing in, that you put people into a cubbyhole, a box, and you got to make it. You got to behave in a certain way. You felt like it as I said to you, when I got married young at 19, I thought I was a man. I look back at myself now at 19, I was nowhere near a man. And you think you know all the answers, you know all the things, and you realise as you get older, you get this trouble comes up to you, you get different problems, different situations in your life that you've got to deal with. I think I was talking about someone the other night about it, funny enough. I felt like my life I was on a roller coaster, and I didn't realise then that sometimes it's okay to get off and just stand there for a little while. Just get off and take your time. As I said to everyone else, I know it's an old thing, an old saying, I'd say to someone there, take your time, young man. Really think about what you want to do. And don't just rush on that roller coaster. And the other thing with the old saying there, in them days when they say to you about choose a path, why do I always choose the wrong path? I didn't know there was another path I could have choose. I just saw a path and went down it. That's what I'm saying. Said that on the thing of the group. I didn't know there was, you didn't start sitting there and weighing up your options and things like that. And if you can, and what it was with me, by the time I was a certain age, I'm not moaning about it, I loved it. But at the time, it was, it was home, dinner, work, bed, bath, home, dinner, work, bed, bath. And I loved it. I'm not saying I didn't like it, but sometimes I just think to myself, I didn't take time for myself. I didn't think, am I all right? How do I feel?
Yeah.
And then you've got your family, your ties, and you think, you can't, you've got to do this, you've got to be this behaviour, you've got to be your friends. Well, everyone has an influence in them days. You can't say that's what happens when you're younger. Because I mean, wisdom comes with age. Unfortunately, he wished it didn't, but wisdom does come with age. With age comes great wisdom.
And I guess, I mean, saying that, then, I mean, again, the question that I'm asking you is a difficult one, and it's definitely not going to be an answer immediately. But from your perspective, bearing in mind all this introspection that you've had on yourself, moving that forward, what do you think that looks like for the English community? And again, the reason why I said this is because what's happening, if we talk about, for example, Black Lives Matter, which is something that me and you have spoken about, a lot. And one of the things that we've spoken about in a lot of the different interviews that I've had is that it's quite clear that there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of conversations that are happening within the community, a lot of reflectiveness, understanding maybe how things have changed from my mum and dad's generation. I think as Caribbeans of my parents' generation, they didn't really have time to weigh up, like you said, weigh up their options. They just had to do what they needed to do to survive. And in the generations below them were finding that they were born there, but they were having to fight a system that clearly saw them as outsiders.
Yeah.
And then the next generation after that was maybe a little bit more kind of apologetic, maybe compromising, trying to assimilate, maybe assimilating too much. And then the current generation that we're seeing are almost kind of speaking out and just saying, no, this is who we are and this is how we define ourselves. But that's come over decades of conversations and understanding the sorts of deep-rooted dialogues that have existed within the families. How do you begin to establish more deeper-rooted dialogues within the families? Because I get the impression when I've spoken to many of my working class mates that these sorts of conversations, these reflective conversations, don't happen and still don't happen. What do you think needs to happen to begin to get the ball rolling?
Well, it's difficult in the ways of saying it, because obviously first thing that comes involved in that is people's behaviour and people's agendas, as you know, with the reporting and stuff, how it be. So if you could get to nail on that, a certain amount of people with the right agendas and the right practical approach they want to do it, you have got to have conversation. As I said to you, people keep always thinking there's got to be a right and there's got to be a wrong. There hasn't always got to be a right and wrong.
Yeah,
it can be true. What you're saying from the problems you suffered from when you was young and the situations that made you feel, that's right. You did. That's how you suffer. Who am I to tell you, no, you didn't do that? You're exaggerating. The other thing from I say about the EastEnders, when they'll come out of work, that's how they suffered. Them conversations need to be had. There's not got to be people seeing right and wrong. Politics has led to finger pointing there. They're not saying what they're going to do. They're telling you what the other person's doing wrong. We're turning into America. They ain't saying to me, excuse me, they ain't saying, I'm going to make your life better. I'm going to do this with your tax. They're going, look at him. He's got a son who's on drugs. Look at her. She said something racist 10 years ago when she was at a party. That's all they're interested in there. Have the conversation.
What's the word? There's a word for that. There's a word for that. What is it? Not gaslighting. There's a word for it, though. There's a certain word for it.
Gaslighting works, though, I think.
Gaslighting, but there's another word. But go on, Terry. So I didn't mean you just triggered that.
That's right. They're always trying to find their extra agenda to prove their point. So, in other words, stop like it now. We know that Boris done the party gate. We know it was wrong. We know it was wrong. Stop. Keep trying to win on it. He's going. You won on it. Leave it alone. Make sure it doesn't happen again. Talk about it. Don't go on about it for flipping 2 years again when people are dying and people are in poverty and people ain't got no money. And just when you go to me, I'll say to you, 2 people got killed last week. 2 got people stabbed in knife crimes. You go, yeah, Boris Johnson had a party. How do you think about that party gate? But they're trying to win the bigger agenda. They're trying to think what the people want instead of just saying and getting on with doing things and making it move forward, making people get together to talk about, sort it out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alex, I think we're hitting the hour mark. And so much as I know you guys are going to go on, so I think we've got time for maybe a quick fire question. But just want to say, everyone who's made it this far watching, make sure you've dropped a like. Thanks so much for your comments. If you're listening to this right now on Spotify or wherever, drop us a review, give us a follow, whatever you can do. It's super important. But if you made it this far, thank you so much. I think, Alex, we've got enough time for a quick question. And then I think we'll close. We've hit the hour mark.
Cool. Ivan for being shout out to Ivan for being a timekeeper. So I mean,
thanks, Ivan. Yeah.
with these, I think it's quite clear to see for anyone that's listening that these conversations, again, an hour doesn't cut this. This is, I mean, me and Ivan alone have had hours of back and forth. Me and Terry have had hours of back and forth, and I think this is about really taking time to unpack and unpack and unpack. I hope that from this conversation, people are beginning to see, as Terry has rightly highlighted, that there is a lot of different layers to understand before drawing conclusive answers and ideologies. I recognize that people's frustration is drawing people to just want to find the one clear black and white thing to blame it on in order to ease and appease people's frustration. Having said all of that, Terry, is there one thing that you're hoping that people can take away from this conversation that you think will help move everything forward for you in terms of understanding? Is there one thing that you want people to go away and think about? And then I'll do the same thing with Ivan.
In everything in life, as I say, I hope people think hard, don't judge, have a different common agenda, really think hard before making that judgment, whether it be on mental health, whether it be on race, whether it be on saying, think hard before joining in what the next person says to you, because you could be really hurting someone and upsetting their life. Think hard.
Powerful. I love that. Nice one. That was short and to the point. Go on, Ivan.
I think just look at Terry, listen to this conversation that we just had. I think just quite simply that someone who's like lived their life, gone through so much change, and then is able to sit here and just look at those points and kind of map it out roughly where they changed. You know, he's mentioned about his father getting married, the different, you know, him doing extra learning to then be better and better and better, but then to wear it on his sleeve where he's literally telling people, this is what changed me, this is where I am right now, and removing the emotion to some extent completely and just telling you the story of it. And then you make your mind up from it. And I think if you can all just be a bit like Terry or practice that of like, you know, because at the end of the day, you know what they say about changing the future. You don't need a time machine to change the future. Change something today and you just influence the future. And I think if you can take that inspiration of what Terry's saying there about the changes he's done, it's about just change something today, and then next week it will be different. 20 years from now, it will be different. And I think he's you know, you're never too old to learn, never too old to just be like, oh, I was wrong. This is my thinking now. So, you know, just take a little bit of Terry with you. Terry's chocolate orange. I don't know. That'll help you remember it.
I love that.
What are you thinking?
I love that. I'm going to have to go and go to the shop now and see if there's any more Terry's chocolate orange.
Yeah.
For me, I think there's a bit of both of yous really that I want to take away, as well as a chocolate slice. I think there's clearly a link between people being willing to do that self-reflection on self. And I think people can only navigate very difficult conversations honestly and with more clarity when they've had a chance to really sit quietly amongst themselves, or even with their mates, have these introspective conversations about themselves. Where were they when they were younger? Where are they now? Are they where they want to be? Are they happy with what they want? Is there some shame that exists in their life? And I think, although initially this seems almost irrelevant, but what I think it means is it gets us into a space where we can begin to, when we begin to understand ourselves more clearer, I think it helps us to begin to understand things about other people and other things much more clearer. Something that Terry said at the beginning of the interview is that sometimes when people hear something they don't like, they stick on that moment and then they ignore the rest of the information being delivered. Yeah. And I think a good way of being able to deliver that is being able to look at yourself and celebrate the things that you're actually proud of, but at the same time, acknowledging the bits that maybe you're not so proud of. Yeah. Because once you get into that space where you're more used to looking at things that makes you feel uncomfortable, I think you'd find that you'd navigate difficult conversations a lot more easier. So that's my takeaway.
That's great.
Chips and a battered sausage.
There you are. Yeah, you got to throw in a bit of food there. Well, there you are. That's it, wrap, guys. Again, you made it this far. Thank you so much. Drop a like, leave a comment. This is episode 9. That means you got 9 hours at least of previous content if you want to go and watch that. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone who tuned in and everyone who left a comment. And big thanks to Terry for taking the time out to join us.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Alex. Pleasure. Thank you.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Al, anything you want to say?
Yo, I'm just saying, check it out. Leave the comments, as you said, and we look forward to our next conversation coming up soon. I'm not going to say who it is, but at this point, I just leave you to marinate on this one right here.
Obama. All right, Al. Because